Again, welcome everybody to the Blue Hill Avenue Transportation Action Plan May community meeting. We're excited to have you all here. Just as a quick reminder, recordings of all of our past monthly Zoom meetings and other project materials can always be found on our website, which is boston.gov/Blue Hill Avenue. So we always like to start orienting ourselves with the project goals. So the goals of this project are first and foremost to improve pedestrian safety along Blue Hill Avenue. We've heard from people of all ages and abilities that Blue Hill Avenue does not necessarily feel like a place where they want to be walking a lot, even if they would like to access the opportunities and resources available along that avenue. Our second goal is to expand transportation options and their reliability. So right now, it's very stressful, no matter how you choose to travel on Blue Hill Avenue. And a lot of times options aren't reliable. You never quite know how long it's going to take you to get where you need to go, particularly if you're on the bus. And so we are exploring expanding transportation options and reliability of all of those different options through this project. The third goal is to connect infrastructure investments to the work of other city departments and state agencies. So this is really important for us. We like to acknowledge at every one of these meetings that we know that transportation is simply a connector that connects you to people, to resources, to community centers, to activities. And so we're working really closely with other members of both the city and the state, which we'll talk about more, to make sure that we're looking at this project holistically so that it can best serve the residents of Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. In terms of what we'll be discussing today, first we'll do as we always do, assuming there might be some new folks here, tell people where this project came from, who was involved, and why this process is different from some of your other public meeting processes you might have been involved in. The second goal will be to provide some updates about planning studies and engagement activities along Blue Hill Avenue. We're excited to share those with you. And then our third goal is to respond to common questions about how engagement will inform design. So we'll actually introduce some folks from the design team that's coming on board so that they can talk to you about what that's going to look like and how we'll continue to make sure everybody's involved. And then finally, we'll provide an overview of upcoming engagement and how to get involved. And I'll pass to Shavella for ground rules.
Thank you, Kirsty. Good evening, everyone. My name is Shavella Lee Pacheco, and I just want to set some ground rules. We are quite literally planning the future of our city, and so we're not always going to agree on everything with each other. So we do want to make sure that there's some ground rules so we can have a healthy conversation around this, though. The first is just to maintain respect for others in this space. For yourself, I think someone brought it back, but for yourself, for the consultants, for the city, but also for the community, there will be people in the chat. Everyone is coming to this meeting with different experiences, different backgrounds, and different perspectives. So we want to make sure that that's respected. The second is we ask that everyone use I statements. So if you can please speak about your experience around Blue Hill Avenue. And if you do say we, if you are representing a neighborhood group or association, if you could just let us know who you are representing. The third we ask is step up and step back. This is something we use with youth often. So asking people who aren't speaking to please step up, share your experiences, share your thoughts and opinions. And if you are someone who's sharing, who has been heard, if you could just take a step back so others feel comfortable speaking up. And the last is we are leaving some time at the end, as we have been in these public meetings, to allow for conversation and to allow for Q&A and dialogue. So please keep your questions for the end. Thank you.
Thanks, Shavella. Alrighty, so moving on to tonight's agenda. As I mentioned, we'll do the meet the team, the project overview, reaffirm those public commitments that we've made as a city and as a project team, respond to some common questions about connecting engagement to design, and end with how to get involved in that open discussion period. We will try to end promptly at 8 p.m. to be respectful of people's time.
All right. Hi, everybody. My name is Jeff Rosenblum. I'm with Tool Design Group, one of the consultants helping out with this project. And to start, we just want to get a sense of who is in the room with us today? What's your primary way of traveling around Blue Hill Avenue? Why is this how you primarily get around? And what's your home zip code? Just to get a sense of the geographic reach of everybody. I'm going to launch a poll for people to do that through Zoom. If for some reason it's not working, no problem. Just you can put your thoughts in the chat if you want to answer these questions that way. So I have launched the poll. Hopefully everyone has access to it. All right, it looks about like half of people have responded. So if you haven't, still time. Now's your chance. For those that just arrived, we're doing a quick poll of how people primarily get around on Blue Hill Avenue and why, and generally where people are from by putting in zip code. And if the poll didn't show up for you, feel free to put this information in the chat. All right, I'm going to close the poll, and I think I can even share the results. Can people see that? Great. So this gives a little bit of a sense of who's here in terms of primary modes. Not very many people biking, some taking public transit, a lot of people driving, some people walking is primary mode. I mean, we're going to talk about accommodating all of these different modes as part of this project. And I will pass it to Kirsty.
Thanks so much, Jeff. So we'll move briefly through our Meet the Team project overview and public commitments. Oh, I think we skipped one slide.
We can go back one slide, I think. And then forward one. Yeah.
We might be having some technical difficulties, as one does with Zoom sometimes. Oh, interesting. That's always fun to get an error message. So I'll give a brief overview sort of while we work through this. I have done it almost every month since October. So on the public sector team side, you have myself, who you hear from all of the time. My name's Kirsty Hostetter. I work for the Boston Transportation Department, and I am the project manager for this project. I am supported by a number of wonderful colleagues at the Boston Transportation Department, including Charlotte Fleetwood, who is working on our Mattapan Square portion of the project and has a public meeting coming up about that she'll share details for at the end. And then also by my colleague Maya Mugdal, who some of you might have heard from last month in my absence. She's also working with us on this. In addition to that point of their third goal of making sure we're really looking at this project holistically, we are working closely with people across city departments. So you'll see that Kenya Beeman, the community liaison for Mattapan for the BPDA, introduced herself in the chat. We're working closely with Office of Housing, Parks and Recreation, sort of across the city to make sure that we're taking into account all the various needs of people who use Blue Hill Avenue. We are also working with our state partners because the state, Blue Hill Avenue is one of those fun places where a couple of intersections are actually owned by the state, not the city. We have the Neponset River Greenway right there, which is an amazing resource. So we're working closely with those partners, specifically the transit priority team over at the MBTA, the capital planning team, and then at DCR, we're working with the folks who run projects for DCR and also work on operations and maintenance for the Neponset River Greenway and that area sort of towards Mattapan Square. So I think we are working through the technical difficulties.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you,
will
everybody.
see if I can share my screen.
Great.
I can share. It's just that I was using a PowerPoint version, so I can go back to you. Oh, there we go.
Okay, Jeff, go ahead and share if you want.
No, you're good.
Okay. So, I guess you all can hear me since Jeff was responding. I'm Stephen Gray with Grayscale Collaborative, another one of the consulting firms that's working with the city and the public on this. And we have a sort of constellation of groups. You've met Jeff, you've met Shavella every month when we meet. We also have Alenza from Powerful Pathways and Real Talk for Change. So Consult Leela, Tool Design Group, and Grayscale Collaborative as well. Oh. We also are working with community partners that we've been working with for quite a while now. Mattapan Food and Fitness Coalition, Greater Mattapan Neighborhood Council, Morningstar Baptist Church, Mattapan Square Main Streets, Garrison Trotter Neighborhood Association, and now Grove Hall Main Streets as well. Kirsty introduced the public agencies, Boston Transportation Department, BPDA, and MBTA at the state level. And then there's a list of folks that we've been meeting with and sharing information with and getting feedback from on a sort of semi-regular basis every about 6 weeks, and sharing with them updates in between that time. That's Garrison Trotter Neighborhood Association, Greater Grove Hall Main Streets, Project Right, Franklin Park Coalition, Mattapan Teen Center, Prince Hall Grand Lodge, Mattapan Community Health Center, and the Franklin Park Zoo. Next slide. And there's tons of work going on, which is why we are trying to keep this net wide in terms of who we're talking to, both in terms of community organizations, but also in terms of internal departments. And so if you've been attending these meetings on a semi-regular basis every month, you'll have noticed that we invite folks from other departments to join these conversations so that we know what they're doing, they know what we're doing, and everything that we're doing is in service to community interests. Next slide. So just some updates on things that have been going on since the last community meeting a month ago. There was a pop-up exhibit open house at Grove Hall Library on April 27th, which you see on the upper left. And that exhibit was exhibited in Mattapan Square in Grove Hall. And we're hoping to be able to exhibit it again in another one of our Not Your Average public meetings. Consult Leela did host another Not Your Average public meeting also on April 27th. At Kay's Lounge. We have another one of those planned for June. We don't have the date set or the location, but it will be in the Grove Hall area. We've had a number of Real Talk conversations with residents by Zoom. Actually, next week, there'll be a very large group of youth having a Real Talk conversation, again, hosted by Consult Leela. Livable Streets Alliance has been helping us with bus rider surveys along Blue Hill Avenue. We've been working with MAPC to do a sort of pilot parking survey around the Harvard Neighborhood Health Center. There have been 2 drop-ins, one in Grove Hall and one in Mattapan Square, which we will continue to have on a weekly basis and share those times with you on the last slide. And topics that we covered in the April meeting last month were the Columbus Avenue bus study, which if it's not already, will be publicly available very soon, and talking about green infrastructure. So how plants and water and all of the sort of natural systems that are involved in our communities can actually be of service to us in terms of controlling stormwater, providing shade and respite, and also a little bit of beauty in the neighborhood. The topic for today is how we will connect engagement to design. And I think this has been something that folks have wanted to talk about for a long time. And so now we're finally getting to the point where the design team is being onboarded into the city and into the MBTA and are ready to start applying some of the feedback that we've been collecting over the last year and a half. Next slide. So just a reminder of the city's public commitments about this project. The city and engagement team are committed to making informed, data-driven decisions that respond to questions raised by the public. And that's why you'll notice every month we cover some of the questions that have been raised and try to answer those questions and then solicit more feedback and input in that way. Commitment number 2 is that the city and engagement team are committed to improving pedestrian safety along Blue Hill Avenue. No matter what the investment looks like along Blue Hill Avenue, pedestrian safety has been key and central in importance to the city, and I think also based on a lot of the feedback to community members as well. And commitment 3, the city and engagement team believe that the public funding for this project should be allocated based on public priorities. So the city and MBTA are not being coy about what they think and what they recommend, but at the end of the day, what comes to consensus within this engagement process is what public funds will be spent on. Next slide. So, as I mentioned, this is not just transportation. It's a major infrastructure investment. It involves the public realm. It involves impacts and considerations for housing, affordability, and development, for local businesses and employment. And so there have been a number of touch points that we've had since June 2019, 25 public meetings about Blue Hill Avenue or Mattapan Square, more than 40 in-person drop-ins, 4 community walks, 15 work sessions, 2 mailers that were sent out to a half-mile radius of everyone living along Blue Hill Avenue, and over 1,000 responses from multiple surveys. And that number is going to increase, continue to increase over the coming months as engagement continues. And so it's just, I think it's been really important for this team, for the city, and based upon a lot of community feedback, that we're not just thinking about buses, we're not just thinking about sidewalks, we're not just thinking about bike lanes or street trees or lighting, but we are thinking about all those things and how they impact the overall setting of the neighborhood and community life and the ability for people to remain and for businesses to thrive. Next slide. So I'll pass it to Shavella for some Complete Streets Deets responses.
Thank you, Stephen. This is a very text-heavy visual, but I did want to share this with everyone. I'm going to speak for just a minute before I dive into this visual. At Consult Lila, we created a workshop called Complete Streets Deets to really educate our youth between the ages of 10 and 18 in transportation planning in Boston. So we really spoke about who are the transportation agencies, what is transportation planning, and what does it look like? We have led a number of those between 2020 and today. We've reached young people at the Mattapan Teen Center, at some of the local community centers, the Gallivan and the Mildred. And most of this work early on was really focused on Mattapan Square. So this visual that I am sharing with you today is from 2020 to 2021, focused on the Mattapan youth speaking about Mattapan Square. So we really wanted to share this data here with everyone because our young people have a different perspective on Blue Hill Avenue and on what it looks like and what they need from it. So I'm really briefly going to go through some of this information because we are going to dive deeper into this next Tuesday, excuse me, which Charlotte will speak to. So I just wanted to share, we did have this survey at the end of our workshop. It was quite a long one, and we had 88 young people actually complete that survey. So you can see it on the table in the top right, 26 of those young people were between the ages of 6 and 14, and 62 of them were between the ages of 15 and 19. We have spoken to more young people since then, but just wanted to share this with you. You can see on the left-hand side, the demographics, and as well as on the bottom left-hand bar graph, how they associate with Blue Hill Avenue. So more than half of the young people that we spoke to either live on or nearby Blue Hill. So they are sharing their firsthand experiences. Next slide. I'm just going to share what we heard from some of these young people. So some of what these youth have told us, the first is they really want planners to create an efficient way for pedestrians to cross without getting hurt. We've heard a lot from youth that they are not able to, they don't feel comfortable crossing the streets and they don't feel safe for a number of reasons. You can see on the top right-hand side, someone said it's pretty safe most times, but some people drive fast at night and speeding makes it a bit unsafe. So they have always also touched on speeding, how safe they feel, as well as what they feel is necessary. So in the bottom left-hand quote, this is actually from the Mattahunt Elementary School. So we presented our Complete Streets Deeds workshop to 5th and 6th graders at the Mattahunt recently. So that's the only quote that's not from earlier years. And one of these students said that as a walker in Mattapan, I believe we need more lights because it is too dark in the mornings. Most of these youth or young people, young students are traveling and catching their school bus in the morning and traveling before the sun has risen. So they're really sharing a different perspective than some of us who might be driving to work early in the morning. And the last quote that we wanted to highlight here is our youth said that fixing the roads, placing grocery stores off of this road, because people can access it through the bus if you make the bus accessible to everyone. And they suggest that the lines be repainted. So that was just a really brief snapshot of what we've heard from some of these young people. And this is a summary of how they would like to see the following change on Blue Hill Avenue. Again, this is from 2020 to 2021 of those 88 youth between the ages of 6 and 19 years old. So the majority, 70% of these young people we spoke to said that they want to have safer crosswalks. That's really important to them, as you saw in the quotes, and as will be elaborated on in the data in the meeting next week. 65%, the 64.77, the next second most requested need is to improve public transportation services. And so that can mean a number of things, time, bus stations. We've heard quite a range of things from the youth. 51% said they'd like to have more green space, and 47% said they want to have bike lanes and paths separated from other traffic. So again, we just wanted to bring in some of what we've been hearing from the youth into this meeting to just uplift their voices, since they are not typically in public meetings. Although I will say there's an 8th grader who is in our meeting today who reached out to me. Thank you, everyone. And if you'd like to hear more, we will be sharing much more of this information next Tuesday. Thank you. I'll pass it back to Kirsty.
Thanks so much, Shavella. We've been really excited to have consult Leela on this team so that we can have that focus on making sure we hear from the voices of youth. So thank you for presenting today. So now we're going to move into the section where we respond to common questions. And specifically today, we'll be talking about bringing engagement into design. So throughout the process, since we sort of first started really going out to the public, last year. Yes, last year. I have to remind myself how long I've worked on this project sometimes. We've received a lot of design related questions. So people are asking things like, has there been a feasibility study? The city says they like center running bus lanes as an option. Would it even fit on the whole corridor? Where can we place more street furniture and seating? We've heard a lot about the desire for more benches and areas to sit. Can the placement of crosswalks be moved or adjusted at areas where we see a lot of jaywalking, particularly around bus stops and places like that? Can the city look at the concurrent pedestrian and vehicle lights at the intersection of Blue Hill Ave and Morton Street? So that's where you have the sign for people to walk and the green light for cars at the same exact time. And sometimes it means people try to speed out ahead of pedestrians. And so someone told us that the current situation is dangerous for pedestrians, talking about their experience. So in order to answer questions like these, we really have to start talking about what Blue Hill Avenue could look like in the future and sort of what alternative design scenarios are available, and then talk about the trade-offs between those different options. So the next slide. In terms of some design process updates, so what we're doing right now is we are reviewing all of the community feedback we've collected to date across all of those opportunities we talked about on a previous slide. So everything that's been mentioned in these meetings, through our Real Talk conversations, at our drop-ins at the local library branches, people who have written into the mailbox or called into the phone line. And we, based on that feedback, will be developing various alternative design scenarios for the corridor based on what we've heard, and also sort of key transportation planning principles. And we'll be presenting all of those sort of next month is the goal, to actually be able to come and talk to people about sort of some of the design options available for Blue Hill Avenue based on what we've heard. But importantly, we want to make sure we have a way to talk about those options with you all in ways that are responsive to the questions that we've heard to date. So to evaluate these design options, we'll be using metrics that we can use to compare alternative design scenarios, both against each other and then also at each stage of the process. So with that, I'm actually going to pass it off to our design team, who we are excited to formally introduce as joining both the public sector team and the engagement teams that you've heard about before. They'll talk us through some of those metrics and how they'll be used in the process. So handing it off to you, Reagan.
Thank you, Kirsty. My name is Reagan Checchio. I work for Regina Villa Associates. And you can see on screen, there is the design team listed here, and along with sort of the leads for each part of the team. Similar to the first slide, the public agencies in question are the MBTA, again, and the Boston Transportation Department. Our consultant team is led by WSP and project managed by Ned Codd. I think Ned is here tonight. So if I falter on any of the technical issues, I am sure he will help me out with that. We also have Stullen Lee, David Lee, to do urban design. Urban Ideas Lab will be working on the urban design and landscape architecture. Matt Skelly will be doing traffic engineering. And as I mentioned before, Regina Villa Associates, my firm, we will work on public outreach, slotting into the engagement efforts already underway. And my colleague Taylor is also here tonight as well. Next slide, Jeff. Great. So as Kirsty mentioned, I'm here to talk a little bit about metrics, but since I am not the technical expert, I am more here to talk about how where the metrics came from, and how it has been influenced by the engagement process to date. So metrics will come from best practices as design professionals and what makes sense to do, but also the feedback received at community meetings, the drop-ins, and also bus operator interviews, which I don't know that we've talked about so far as much. Can you go to the next slide, please? So the metrics are going to be used, as Kirsty mentioned, to compare the alternative design scenarios at each stage of the process. And I am about to go through the draft metrics now to get your feedback on that, to see if they're consistent with what you've also been hearing as you've been at these meetings and talking to your neighbors and others in the community. There's 3 major categories. One is the quantitative metrics. So those are the ones that can be added up along the corridor so you can compare it across design scenarios. I'm going to go through all of these in a little bit more detail as we move forward. The second will be at specific locations, looking at before and after comparisons. And the third category is more qualitative metrics that will be analyzed at the corridor level across the alternative design scenarios. I'll also note as we get into these in a little bit more detail that we have posted the specific metrics in a more detailed document on the project website for you to download and review after the meeting. I'll post the link as soon as I finish running through my slides, so you have that as well. So what we've heard to date, these are the sorts of questions that we've been hearing from the community, which help generate those 3 categories of metrics that I just talked about, and they're going to be taken into consideration. So the first is, will the project improve pedestrian access and safety along the corridor? Will parking spaces be preserved? Will parking and traffic enforcement in the project area be evaluated? Will bus ridership data be examined and reviewed throughout the design process? Will the demand for and impact of bike lanes be examined? And will the project, sorry, that was a little typo there. Will the project create new spaces and develop green infrastructure in the corridor? And will the design connect into both existing and planned broader Boston transportation networks? And that's sort of the idea of not just looking at it as an isolated corridor. So hopefully those questions are similar to the questions you've been hearing at these meetings. And now I will do the deep dive about the different metrics. So the first metric is what I would describe as the quantitative metric to be used. So for this, we're going to look at bus stop locations and bus ridership. So looking at existing boarding data at buses by stop at the stop level, pedestrian access and safety. That will include, for example, the number of curb ramps in the corridor that are ADA compliant. We'll be measuring that and evaluating that. Parking spaces. So that's the number of on-street parking spaces that are available and the type of regulation that applies to each. So like if it's unregulated, if it's a 2-hour zone, if it's a loading zone, those sorts of, all of those descriptive categories will be included. The number of trees on the street, on the sidewalk, or in the median. Bike lanes, the length of the bike lanes, the type of bike lanes, whether they're painted, just painted lines, or if they're separated bike lanes. The number of breaks, so if the bike lanes aren't all connected to each other, those are going to be examined across the different scenarios. And also this idea of new people spaces. I almost said pizza spaces. I must be hungry. People spaces. So that's available for plazas and landscaping. And that's seeing sort of the potential for change in the square footage, right? That's measured in square footage. So again, these are the quantitative metrics that would be compared in each of the design scenarios. So you can easily compare one design to another design. Next slide. So as Jeff's able to, there we go. Then we're also going to talk about the before and after comparisons at specific locations. So for example, pedestrian access and safety. How far, what's the length to cross, crossing distances, right? We'll look at the number and type of general traffic lanes at major intersections. So like the number of left turn lanes, the number of through travel lanes, the number of shared through and turn lanes, and also the amount of dedicated bus lanes in the potential options. We'll also be looking at the municipal parking lot data and to display the number of parking spaces, and again, talking about what the parking regulations are in those lots. I think the next slide, Jeff. So yes, so the third and final category is more qualitative metrics. And these are also things that we've been hearing at meetings and events. So there will be pedestrian access and safety. So that's sort of the overall level of pedestrian comfort and safety rating. There's the bike access and safety, same thing, but for bike riders. And then also we've heard a lot about parking and traffic enforcement, and looking at the parking and traffic enforcement resources required for this. So what enforcement resources will be necessary? Who's going to do that enforcement? How much time should be spent on the corridor? What kind of coverage across the whole corridor will be needed? So these again are these specific categories of data that we're going to look at for each alternative, so that everyone will have a fully transparent view of the trade-offs needed for each. Can you go to the next slide? So what are the next steps in this design process? So we want to hear from you tonight on your feedback. Do these measurements, does this data reflect what you will be needing to see in order to evaluate the alternatives and see what the trade-offs are for each? And also, does it reflect what you're hearing from your friends and neighbors about this project? We're going to use that to further refine things, and then we will do this analysis. As Kirsty mentioned, we're hoping to share with you the design options, but have this data, these metrics available, so you will be able to absorb this information more easily, I think. We're also going to share the results of this analysis, not only with the city and elected officials and you in June. I think Stephen has a slide later on talking about that a little bit more. So I know this was a lot, so I'm going to take a pause. I'm going to put the link in the chat to the document, but I'll turn it back over to Jeff to just sort of give it sort of instant poll, right? At first blush, to what degree do you think these metrics are reflective of what your interests are and the questions you have about a potential design? So Jeff, I will turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. So I'm going to launch this poll, but I'm also in real time going to recognize that you can't see the metrics right this second. So I'm going to attempt to go backwards on the slides. All right, we have about half of people who responded. I'm just going to continue to go back and forth a little bit with the slides so people can take a look at them in more detail.
Jeff, if people are also able to, I did just post the link in the chat to the document that has it listed.
All right. I'm gonna end the poll and share the results so you can see what some others were thinking in the room. Again, we recognize it's hard to present these and have you digest them and then answer it right away, but we like to just get a quick feel, just on the spot, what people generally are thinking about these. There is other opportunities to give feedback in terms of specifics through this, but we just wanted to get a quick sense of what people were thinking. So thank you for that. And I'll pass to Stephen.
Thanks, Jeff. So how to get involved? Obviously, next slide. We have these meetings every month. We will have another meeting a month from today on June 27th, or every fourth Tuesday from 6:30 to 8. We are looking into extending that regular monthly meeting beyond June, but certainly the June 27th is already scheduled. We have an open house and we'll have a number of those that we have not yet scheduled, but they are TBD. Again, this process of onboarding the design team and continuing with the conversation that we've been having for over a year now is going to have a lot of overlap. So we're not going to just kind of hand it off, but we're going to continue and bring the designers on so that they can get the benefit of the process that we've had to date. Next slide. Next slide. We've had a number of real talks, as I mentioned, and are having a really large one with youth next week. We'd love to get more people involved in the real talks. So please scan this QR code right now, or if someone can paste in the link to RSVP for a real talk. Again, it's a group of 4 to 8 community members. After you participated in a real talk, which you are compensated for, you can then decide you might want to host a real talk, in which case you're compensated at a much higher rate and can convene some of your neighbors to have a similar kind of conversation. Those conversations are recorded. They will be analyzed and we will bring emerging themes out of the conversations. And it's really thinking about what the future of the neighborhood can look like and where you see your place in that and how we can make that happen. Next slide. So not your average public meeting. There will be another one in June. This will be in Grove Hall. There are drop-ins in Grove Hall and Mattapan Square every week. Grove Hall Public Library every Wednesday from 10 to 12. You can drop in. Kirsty and others from her team are there from the city to answer any questions that you have about this process or this project, or ideas you want to share, concerns that you have, follow-ups you want to make. And then Mattapan Square Public Library every Thursday from 1 to 3 p.m. Next slide. And I'll hand it back to Kirsty to close us out with a poll.
Yes, so I see, Jeff, thank you for launching the poll. So we just always like to ask people if they're interested in getting more involved. We have some opportunities to sort of help us with engagement, both with those real talk conversations, which are smaller group conversations, really forward looking, talking about how you experience your neighborhood today, how you'd like to experience it in the future. And we also have had different opportunities pop up. For example, we have some folks right now who are helping us survey bus riders on Blue Hill Avenue. So lots of different ways to get involved. And thank you to all of you who have responded yes to this so far. It's been really great to see many of you at Real Talk Conversations and have you all get involved in different ways. So we really appreciate it. Alrighty. And then in terms of how to stay connected, so as we've mentioned, we know that we've presented a lot of information tonight, the metrics, some of you all might want to dive into them a bit more as referenced. So there's the link in the chat. They're also available on boston.gov/Blue Hill Avenue. They are under the project materials section. And if you have feedback about those, if you want to talk about them more, if there are things we've missed, there are lots of ways to let us know. You can type it in the chat here tonight. We'll have the sort of question and answer portion that will start in just a moment here. And then you can also contact us by phone. So 617-635-3944. That goes straight to the phone on my desk. I check those voicemails very regularly, and we'll get back in touch. If you want a callback number, just make sure if you want to be called back, just make sure to leave a callback number. And we also check our email inbox very regularly too. So that's bluehillavenue@boston.gov, or you could use the form where we've been constantly collecting the questions that people have about the project or the process. And that form is actually where we got a lot of the questions you saw earlier tonight that we're trying to respond to at the metrics. So with that, I think we have concluded the presentation and can move into some questions and answers. So I think, Jeff, for now, yeah, we can stop sharing screen. I know that there were some questions in the chat, and then Ms. Forbes, I know that you also have your hand up. So let me I'll try to ping back and forth. So I believe it was Ms. Thompson who had a question. Yes, are the results of the surveys and comments available to the public? So we haven't shown a lot of that publicly yet, partly because we're trying to get it all in one location. We've done a lot of different types of outreach. So we've collected survey responses over here, and then we've been pulling like the chat from these public meetings over there. We're trying to get that put into one cohesive resource that even we can use as a team as we build out alternative design scenarios. And then also we want to make sure that there's no like private information in there. A lot of times we collect things like people's name and emails and whether or not they want to get involved and maybe some demographic information. So we just want to be careful about people's privacy, but we will definitely be reporting back on the results of those different things. So keep an eye out, and anytime new data gets added, we will make sure to share it with our listserv as well with the newsletter. So great question. And Mrs. Forbes, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, how you doing?
Good, how are you?
I'm hanging in there so far, so good. I'm a little bit concerned only because I come from the background where you measure twice and cut once. And I see that there's a lot of theory involved with what you're doing. And I'm just concerned that you're missing a lot of the factors that you haven't considered in the planning. And I see that Ms. Fleetwood is here. Is it possible for you to do a section of Blue Hill Ave with temporary barriers to simulate what you're trying to do on the entire length of Blue Hill Avenue? Because I think there's a lot of factors that you haven't taken into consideration as you plan a theoretical model, because I don't know where you're, if you're planning on moving parking off, if you're aware that there's a lot of delivery vehicles that are coming in, if there's a lot of people who are perhaps you're not considering all the factors, and the fact that Blue Hill Ave, even as it is now, a busy road that has issues even before you're putting in this design. Can we do a dry run to see where you might be missing some things? Theory is great. If you live in a bubble, that's fine, but people's habits and character, how they work. That's why I want to make sure you're taking into effect. Thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Ms. Forbes. It's a good question. Like you said, this is 3 miles. This is a big, long street. It serves a lot of people, a lot of different types of uses. So it's hard for us to do what you're talking about in terms of what we would call a pilot, where you kind of like test something out, because the types of things that we're talking through, like having a lane for buses or something like that, would require changes to our signals. It would require like areas for people to board the bus if we're not going to just, because if we piloted bus lanes on the side or something, then what do you do about the parking? So unfortunately, this project, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, this project is so complex that it would be hard to do sort of that short-term testing. But your concerns that you lifted up are really important. So there are some other ways that we are trying to get at those same answers, since we can't trial this in the way we could with like a smaller safety improvement or something like that. So to the point about businesses, we've committed to surveying every business on Blue Hill Avenue. We've made a good bit of progress on that in the square. We're lagging behind, frankly, I'll be honest, in Grove Hall. But we're working on making a big push for that this summer, and we're going to be working in close partnership with the Greater Grove Hall main streets to get at those things, like making sure we know where people get their deliveries, not only where, but in how big of a truck. You know, like, are they coming in the back of a van? Are they coming on an 18-wheeler like Duncan so often does? Those sorts of questions. And then you'll see too, and you know, as we start to talk through designs, we've really committed to this block by block strategy, so that folks from the community who really have that deep experiential knowledge of parts of the corridor can come in and tell us, like, I don't know if you've thought about X, like my neighbor unloads groceries here and she, you know, has trouble, she has a disability or she has trouble walking. She's going to need somewhere in order to do that. Those sorts of small things, so that if we do our jobs well, we can get at those through the conversations that we're committed to having with folks over the course of talking through designs to make sure that we those elements right. So hopefully that answered your question, Ms. Forbes. Okay, looking back at the chat, why would the signals have to change? It's a great question. So sometimes the signals have to change in order to let the bus go first. So depending on where it is, or if you have, for example, there's a lot of coordination that has to go on in terms of who can go straight, who can go right, where are they located and relative to each other, where are people walking, all those sorts of things. So those, sometimes we don't have the correct signals for it. Like if you need to separate the people walking and the bus going and also the cars, we don't always have all the signal heads that we need for that. So that can be a barrier. And also signal timing is way more complicated than I ever anticipated before I got into this profession. And so we can't just do like small tweaks without thinking about how it will affect the broader network. We are, however, very committed to, as part of this project, looking at signal timing overall. So we've heard a lot about people having a lot of delay at lights, whether they're walking or they're in a car or they're on a bus. We've also heard about people not having enough time to cross the street. So that'll also be part of this conversation that we're having with people about those trade-offs, because signals are kind of like a pie, and you only have so much of a pie to distribute to all these different people and all these different movements. And so how you do that is actually a difficult question. Next, I'm going to go to Mr. Murphy. Hi, Mr. Murphy. I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Hello.
I'm sorry, I was having a little trouble. Yeah, I have a few concerns, as well as one of the ladies that had talked earlier.
Yeah.
One thing I couldn't do, I'm sorry, real quick, I couldn't really answer the survey in time, that the very first survey that people were
No
answering,
worries.
but where we're from. But I wanted to say that I drive a lot.
Yeah.
And for me, driving, like, I work for the T. I work construction, and I drive a lot because just like things like taking the T and riding the bike are just not feasible modes of transportation for me. And like, there are many people like me, even though I should be talking about myself. It's just not feasible because I don't have like a static work site.
Mhm.
You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't show up at the same spot every single day. And the work hours, sometimes I start at 5, maybe 4, like, so like things like riding a bike and taking the T, that's just, it doesn't work for me. You know what I mean? And that's one thing. And another thing I had a concern about is, like, after you implement certain things, like say bike lanes and stuff, like, do you guys come back and take any data on how much usage you're gaining out of it? Like an example would be American Legion Highway. I mean, that is a disaster now. And there's a bike lane there, but it's just never used. And you see how the traffic just backs up from that. And I have a fear that that's the same thing's going to happen with Blue Hill Ave. You're going to get, we talk about safety with bikes and pedestrians, but once you add these bike lanes, you don't get too much use out of it. And so it's like kind of defeats the purpose. And my last thing I want to mention about is pedestrian safety. It kind of goes both ways. I mean, I see it every single day. People just walk out in the street, phone in their face. Very rarely do they use the crosswalk. Like I live in Mattapan Square, so I see it all the time. The crosswalk's not being used. And like I said, the safety goes both ways. We can't, when I was younger, there was always a campaign of looking both ways before you cross the street. That's all gone. Everybody's phone is just in their face now, and that's just my 2 cents for tonight.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay, great. First, thank you for your work in keeping our MBTA system running. We appreciate you. So in terms of your question, so completely agreed. There will always be people who need to drive. There will also always be people who need to take the bus. There will always be people who need to walk. So we are absolutely designing with people using different modes in mind, and we'll make sure that all of the sort of alternative design scenarios we share speak to each of those specific perspectives in terms of, what the impact might be on the experience. And that's part of what the metrics are for. So the metrics are designed to help facilitate the conversations that we'll need to have with you all, and also that, members of community will have with each other about, what some of the impacts might be. So that's to your first point. To your second point about, do we study things after we put them in? Yes, we do. So we have started trying to, we've gotten access to new data sources. We've been trying to do a better job of really stepping in and doing thorough analyses of projects after they've gone in the ground. In terms of American Legion specifically, I was not at the city actually when that project went in, but my understanding of how it's been communicated to me is that the primary goal of American Legion was actually to stop drag racing on American Legion, because people were quite literally dying because of reckless driving. And so part of what, putting the bike lane there does is it takes up extra space. And then that's why you sort of have the narrowing from two lanes to one. I've heard a lot of feedback that I've passed to that American Legion project team about, like, maybe it narrows too much, those sorts of questions for sure. In terms of, how many people are actually using the American Legion bike lane, part of why we have that metric about what role does this play in the broader network is because if things aren't connected to a broader network, people might not necessarily use them. So American Legion, while that is quite a good bike lane there, it's not quite keyed into the rest of the bike network yet. So it doesn't connect you to a lot. You can't use it to get a ton of places unless you live close to that area. You want to go to Franklin Park. And so we're sort of in this intermittent stage where we're trying to better build out our networks as a city. But until we can make those connections, we might not see as much use on those sorts of areas as we might hope we will in the future. So that was question number 2. Question number 3 was, I'm forgetting now. Anybody help me out? Question number 3. I think. No. Okay. I'm so sorry, sir. I'll watch the recording of this. This is in part why we record these things. And I will, I have your email, so I will make sure to respond to you with question number 3. I'm so sorry about that. Okay. I am just trying to get caught up in the chat. Got a lot of questions coming in. Okay. Sorry. So, okay, I'm seeing a lot about sort of, not so much questions, but a lot of notes about specific design challenges that people are sort of thinking through and thinking ahead about, which is really helpful. The more specific, the better on these, because we absolutely want this information. So, you know, if there are any specific places where you see like certain behavior, I've heard so much about Happy Supermarket and triple parking. So that's something that we're very attuned to, all of those items. There's a question about whether or not this would be similar to the redesign on Tremont Street in the South End. So there are two very different types of streets. They're different in terms of, you know, sort of like Tremont Street is almost exclusively business land uses. We've got a lot more residential along Blue Hill Avenue. The street widths are different, kind of how they're used is different. So I don't think that like that is exactly how Blue Hill Ave will look. This is also why we're going to start talking about design soon, so people can get an idea of what things could look like under different options or different scenarios. So now I'm going to ask Mr. Jean-Baptiste to unmute.
Hi, it's Miss Jean-Baptiste.
Miss Jean-Baptiste, I'm so sorry. Hello.
Hi, hello. Thank you for all of this. I'm just curious, has there been talk in the design planning about implementing, I forget the name of these things, the solar for electric cars?
Oh, EV
power
charging.
up charging stations? And
So, sorry, continue, please.
yeah, charging stations, and if that will spill over, for instance, into the Blue Hill Parkway area heading down DCR on in High Park, the Truman Parkway area. I actually live in Milton, right on the Milton Mattapan line, and there's a number of riders who actually park in Milton in order to commute into Boston. And I'm just curious if there's been if there's consideration in the design planning, even though we're at the very early stage of talking and design, et cetera, to implement stations that will even intersect into other towns outside of Boston.
Yes, so that's a great question. First, on sort of the electric vehicle charging stations, there actually are some EV charging stations currently available in the public parking lot in Mattapan Square, right behind the post office. So that is currently an option for people. Yeah, we haven't gotten to that point of the design here yet in terms of talking about that, but that's definitely a conversation we'll have. There's also some talk in both Go Boston 2030 about that topic, as well as Plan Mattapan. So those are conversations to have in the future. We are also working on coordinating with Milton. So we've been working through our Metropolitan Area Planning Council, or MAPC, to try and coordinate with our neighbors to the south, because as you mentioned, you know, it's not like no people cross the line between Milton and Mattapan. There's a lot of movement there. So we will be coordinating with our counterparts down in Milton too.
Okay, great. I do have another question quickly.
Yes.
This team, first of all, the weekly check-ins, I just became aware of it today. I haven't been on a call in a while, so that's great that it's happening at Grove Hall and at the the Mattapan Library. Is there a way that team can maybe off schedule visit an organization that's more bilingual in language to communicate an informal town hall to that group? And I'm thinking of a large group of Haitian speaking, Creole speaking people that I'm aware of that may need this information that's so readily used the Blue Hill Avenue Park roadway there, but who are oftentimes unaware that these type of town halls are taking place. And I myself am limited in actually being the spokesman for the group, you know what I mean? But if I know there can be a one and done arranged meeting where we can get a majority of these group leaders. For instance, I know one of the leaders that has a business in Mattapan Square and also has a nursing home that services that community, a large community. It would be helpful to also get that information to other people.
Yes, we would absolutely be interested. We have definitely been sort of Haitian Creole speakers and non-English speakers generally are unfortunately underrepresented currently in the engagement that we've been doing. So we would absolutely love to connect with you. If you don't mind emailing sort of the project email, we can absolutely get in touch after this. Would love to collaborate on that.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay. Yes, and Kenya is also in the chat. She has done a lot of work on this for us. So we'll have her helping on this too. Okay, I know that Shavella highlighted some things from the chat earlier that I missed. Okay, so some questions from Mr. Elisa. What are the metrics? How are they developed? What is a metric as opposed to an actual engagement process? So the metrics, actually, Reagan, would you like to talk sort of again about how the metrics were developed and what it is as opposed to an actual engagement process?
Sure. I think the metrics, I mean, the easiest way I could say it, and some of the more technical folks can tell me, can jump in if I have this wrong, is I think the metrics will, with respect to the engagement, which is more my cup of tea here, the metrics will be used to facilitate the engagement process. It is designed to provide the public the information so they can make informed decisions about what they are seeing in terms of the designs in front of them. For example, if you have a design and you're looking and it's, you know, it's like an engineering looking drawing and like, what does this mean? And I think the metrics are tools to be able to compare across, and you can see how many parking spaces are going to be in this one alternative versus another, for example. That's just one example. So I think what we want to make sure is that we're developing the right measurements, right, to share when this design scenarios are also shared and then the engagement will be those discussions. I think I called them trade-off discussions because there will be pros and cons depending upon your point of view and your experiences and what's most important to you. And I think this will facilitate that process. Kirsty, does that sort of address things?
Yes, I think so. And just a follow-up question I noted for that in the chat is how do the metrics get compared to the existing situation to talk about whether or not there are benefits?
Thought it would be worse.
Yeah, I think actually, yeah, so I will maybe defer to Ned if he is still on the call for this. But my understanding is that there will be, for example, it won't just be the parking spaces for alternative number 1 and alternative number 2. It would also be compared to the situation on the ground today as well. So it's not just these future scenarios, but also you'll have that data for today. Ned, do I have that right? I see you've come off camera or on camera. You're smiling, but maybe unable to unmute yourself.
Yes, I'm so sorry about that, Ned. You should be able to unmute now.
No worries. I'm off mute now. Yes, that's the case. I mean, that's really, I think, what people are really interested in. How is a proposed design option? How does it impact the street, and how does it compare to what's out there today?
So I don't want to misspeak, but correct me if I'm wrong. So, but any design alternative we have, you will be able to compare it against each other, but also against the current conditions today.
Yes, correct.
Perfect. Thank you.
Yes. Yeah, we're out there. We have collected much of the data. We'll be collecting more data about the existing conditions that we can compare any design options to.
So if you see folks out there in the yellow vests, don't be afraid. No decisions have been made. We're just making sure we got all the data that we need in order to answer your questions, to address the things that we've been seeing in the chat tonight, and make sure that we can have the conversation that the community wants to have about what the options are. I also see that there is a question from Ms. Wilson in the chat. Are they keeping up with beautification of the plants, etc.? Yes, so we actually just had our new head of green infrastructure present at last month's meeting to talk about sort of the city's new approach to how we can better plant our trees to make sure that they thrive, that they're healthy, and that they stick around for a long time. And those are all tactics that we plan to implement on Blue Hill Avenue. A really key part of that actually is pairing those sort of new planting techniques with actual contracts that are set up at the very beginning of the project in order to make sure that everything is properly maintained. So we'll be working on that. And then we also just met with Parks to talk about the sort of the trees as they are today. And so they are monitoring actively all of the trees on Blue Hill Ave right now to see kind of how they leaf, what state they're in, if there needs to be any pruning, those sorts of activities. And we're hopeful that we can have Parks talk some more about that sometime soon. Kenya, hi there. I'm asking you to unmute.
Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I just, good evening, everybody. Just want to reintroduce myself. My name is Kenya Beeman. I'm a lifelong Mattapan resident. I'm also one of the community engagement managers at the BPDA, and I also sit on the team for this project. But I'm speaking as a resident of Mattapan and someone who predominantly drives. One thing I know for sure, driving down Blue Hill Avenue, to sum pretty much my points, is that it can't remain what it is right now. Blue Hill Avenue for decades has not only been neglected, but needs an abundance of improvements of all the things, from traffic lights, sidewalk, to street repaving, to speeding enforcement. I guess it's the parking situation. It's a whole mess. And so we're not going to sit on this call and act like it is not. I think if we're very honest with ourselves, Blue Hill Ave needs a lot of work. Now, what that may look like is still up for discussion. But I want to make sure people are very clear with themselves, whether you live on Blue Hill Avenue or you live off of Blue Hill Avenue, that when we travel up and down that street, it is never a good experience. I don't know if I should be, if I should have a cocktail, or if I should just go somewhere and just rock myself to sleep after driving down Blue Hill Avenue. Like it drives up anxiety. It's just a lot of worry. It just, it rocks your nerves going up and down Blue Hill Avenue. And I also want to just make note that we have a huge people problem, not just with Blue Hill Avenue, but a people problem as it relates to speeding up and down our streets. I live in Mattapan. We literally had somebody knock over one of our treasured statues in Mattapan because of speeding right on Blue Hill Avenue. And then there was another incident since that accident on the same intersection. Tell me that's not a people problem. What are you speeding for? Where are you going? So I just want to just share my own experience. I don't care for driving up and down Blue Hill Avenue, and I'm born and bred in Mattapan, so it's not far from where I live. It would be an easier route for me to get from one neighborhood to the next, but I don't like it because of what it makes me feel. I don't like the anxiety. I don't feel quite safe going down Blue Hill Avenue. I just don't, and I should. And so, again, I just want to remind folks who are Bostonians or not Bostonians that Blue Hill Avenue has been an issue for decades. And this is an opportunity for us to make some very needed improvements. I'm not a statistics person. I just know what I see every day. I know what my eyes observe every time I drive down Blue Hill Avenue, and it's a problem. And so I just wanted to express that from, just my personal experience with Blue Hill Avenue. So thanks, Christy.
Thank you, Kenya. I really appreciate that. And sort of speaking of stress, and then also connecting actually to one of the questions in the chat. Have there been thoughts about the impact of how the proposed changes will impact the volume of school buses for Boston and Metco that travel Blue Hill Avenue? Also, there's the ride transportation service with pickup and drop-offs as well. Are there any conversations with them about the design and impacts? Yes. So to the point of it being so stressful, we have a blanket policy in the city of Boston that all of our bus lanes can be used by emergency vehicles, so ambulances and police, by school buses, and also by the ride vehicles. So that's for folks who have a disability of some kind and need someone that can really pick them up and drop them off at their location. It's a public transportation version of that. So all of those folks can use all sort of boarding platforms that are built as part of our bus projects. They can use all bus lanes. And I think that in addition to providing a really good, high quality place for people to wait for wherever they're going, making sure that there's, we really try to ensure that there's an accessible place for people to drop off. If people are parked in bus lanes, those are not good pickup drop off areas for people who are using any type of mobility device, have a stroller, have a grocery cart. It also, I think, helps with some of the stresses and pressures that we've heard people describe through some of our Real Talk conversations. I was in one with 2 women who were talking about sort of the panic that you feel when you're stuck in traffic and there is an ambulance coming up behind you trying to get by and you don't know where to go or what to do. Bus lanes, dedicated bus lanes serve as a really good path of travel for them so they can get where they need to go and you don't have to worry about if you're in the way, if you're trying to pull out of the way. So just want to reinforce that is a blanket policy that we have as a city. I'm just going to check the chat. So I'm hearing so I'm seeing some questions about, were not really questions, more comments about how, there is agreement that Blue Hill Avenue could work better than it does today. We've heard from a lot of people that it's not somewhere that they like to travel on regularly. It can be stressful, it can be chaotic, it can be really uncomfortable, and it affects how people choose to get around the city and how they choose to get around their neighborhoods. So I would say that again, to the goals of this project, one of the key things we are really trying to think about through this project is access. How can we make sure that everybody, regardless of their means, regardless of how they travel, regardless of what state their body is in, regardless of how old they are, can get where they want to go? Not just where they need to go, but also where they want to go. Blue Hill Avenue is an amazing place. You have so many wonderful parks, you have so many wonderful community spaces, so many wonderful restaurants and businesses. How can we make sure that we are moving towards a project that meets those needs or balances those needs? Because sometimes they are competing. We've heard from folks, I hate getting stuck in traffic. It takes too long to drive. I completely understand that. And also, the faster someone's driving, the more likely they are to kill someone if they hit them. So there are sort of these balancing acts we have to do in transportation planning where we're balancing the needs and perspectives of different people. Like I said, too, with the traffic signals, if you're giving more time to the pedestrian to walk across, that means you might be taking some green light time. So, but these are all conversations that, often we have as transportation professionals. What we're really trying to do through this process and with these metrics is also highlight to you all sort of, what are these things that we're considering? What are these trade-offs so that we can have a conversation in community about how we meet the needs of different people who use and travel on the corridor. So I'm just looking, I know we're nearing 8 o'clock. We do try to be respectful of people's time, but I want to see if there are any sort of other questions. There's a question of, is it feasible to create a computer model to simulate conditions on Blue Hill Avenue? So I will let Ned, I think, talk to some of the more like traffic modeling that we kind of do, but Ms. Forbes, to your point, something that Charlotte and Consult Leela have piloted sort of through, it's not quite I think a computer model like you're talking about, but something that they've really piloted through the Mattapan Square process is having a physical model that people can look at to get an idea for what changes might look like. As we move into the design section of this process for the broader avenue, we will definitely be looking for ways that we can make sure people are getting a better visual of, what things could look like, how things might shift around the street for people who think more in that way, instead of sort of the theoretical question or conversations that we've been having to date, trying to take a pulse from people about what they'd like to see. So Ned, with that though, I'll pass it off to you. Is it working? There we go. I saw it. Muting and unmuting. You're good. Okay, great.
Okay. Yes, there are, we'll be using, kind of a range of tools that are, technical, graphical to kind of communicate the benefits and impacts of any potential changes. And that includes computerized traffic analysis software, where we put in information about the number of lanes, we count the traffic, put in that information, and it analyzes the kind of the level of congestion and delay. That enables us to make projections. We change that model of the corridor to reflect the changes that are under consideration, and look at how that affects the traffic operations, the traffic congestion, and we'll share that information. As you might imagine, that's a pretty pretty labor intensive and time consuming process to kind of build that model and test it. So we are really just getting started on kind of the analysis and design process, kind of taking the baton from kind of more from the planning and outreach, the initial phase of work, but that is something that we will be undertaking and sharing the information that we get from that with this group.
Thanks, Ned. And with that, we are officially at 8:01. So thank you everybody so much for coming tonight. Thank you for posting in the chat. We pull all of that information into our sort of like input tracker that I was mentioning earlier. So that's all really valuable information that gets captured by us. I just appreciate you all showing up with us every fourth Tuesday. We'll have another one of these next month, and we'll start to talk in more detail about design at that meeting. So get excited. In the meantime, if you have any questions, comments, if you just want to talk with me about sort of, what we've been doing today, where we've been going, you can always reach us at our email, bluehillav@boston.gov, or by calling me. That is 617-635-3944. So thank you again, everybody. Have a good night, and hopefully we'll see you in June, if not before then. Bye, everybody. Oh, I will stop recording.